Hey, what's happening out there? Welcome to another edition of the Friday FARcast. I'm Robert Phoenix. Here we go. Well, yesterday's show was scrambled like eggs, wasn't it? Yeah, something very strange was in the air. And wasn't able to complete the transmission in its entirety. So here we are, taking another stab at delivering this to you, complete, concise, and whole. What's going on out there? It is, we have two versions of the days here in Austin. Version 1, gray. Gray day. Wake up, it's gray. Version 2, stunning blue. And rarely is there any kind of in between. It's an interesting notice about the so-called natural world. Let's just all breathe together, shall we? There's a lot to just take in. These are very intense times. And we're going to get into some of that today. I did a pre-record this morning with Darren Williams, live from Liverpool. He was sharing with me what's going on in England post Manchester. Now, I don't agree with Darren completely with his assessment of the Manchester event. I have sort of my own reservations about these things. And I'm going to get into some of the finer details around what went down in Manchester, potentially, along with the whole crisis actor thing and mistaken identity, which I'll talk about as well. We'll get into that. And then I'll play Darren's interview. And then I also did a pre-record with Steve Crimi. And Steve and I are doing this, kind of riffing for about a half an hour every month at the end of the month, the last Friday of every month. And Steve, of course, is a writer and a publisher. His latest book, Katabatic Wind, is available on Logosophia, his publishing company. And we were talking this morning about Eris and chaos, and it's a great conversation. And I'll play that later today in the show as well. So hang on. It's going to be a pretty much a 2-hour gig today, and a lot of conversation. So before we get into the Manchester stuff, I want to just address what I'm seeing out there in the world right now. And I think this ties into the discussion with Chris in some ways. I'm sorry, Steve. And Chris was right there when I was talking with Steve. But there are people that are really struggling. And I mean really struggling. These are very, very, very difficult emotional and spiritual and psychological times. These are very challenging times. I was on Facebook last night, and there's a woman whom I've known on Facebook for a number of years. And her heart is so in the right place. And she really cares about the environment, and she cares about water and people's rights. And, as a result of that, she dedicated herself to going out to to defend the DAPL pipeline and the water and the people. And, she was one of the activists and protesters who got deeply involved, was arrested. There was a bunch of people that were arrested. And the fallout from that event is, how do I say this? I wouldn't say it's tragic, but it is certainly informative and to some degree a bit depressing. Because what happened is that essentially the oil companies won, and the tribes, or the tribe, and the protesters, the activists lost. And anytime you lose, it stinks. And especially when you invest a lot of time and money and effort and heart and soul and spirit, whether or not it was a worthy protest, and I believe it was a worthy protest. How it was at times manipulated and sort of seized for profit and gain, which a lot of times happens. We see this in the alternative truth world. There's a huge thing going down right now with Corey Goode and David Wilcock, and Randy Moggins has just blown the lid off of this whole Corey Goode thing, and there's just meltdown happening in that world. David Wilcock was at Contact in the Desert, and he started screaming at people from the stage. Basically said, if you think I work for the CIA, fuck you. So now David Wilcock is starting to have to address what a lot of people, I believe, valid concerns about what his involvement is with these shadow intelligence agencies and groups. Now, I know things, and I'm not going to go on record with them, but I know things. Things have been told and said to me regarding David, and I don't want to bring him up here. But let's just say that there are some serious holes in his game. So that's all going down, and you have a ton of people that see this is, and I'm drawing a parallel here between Wilcock and Goode, and trying to understand the nature of what's going on with our secret government and the deep state and the Illuminati and the puppet masters who are essentially creating reality, hiding reality from us, whatever it is. There's a group of people that are invested in that, and they're trying to understand it, figure it out, and in many cases, they're taken for a ride. Sometimes the ride is really interesting. It's really imaginative. And it's not real. But they're taken for a ride, and in there they might find a few bits and pieces of truth scattered along the way, like glitter upon a highway. I mean, that's just the way it is. But that's one side. And the other side, you've got the people who are like throwing down teepees and yurts and bringing their dogs and, trying to stare down the man and stand down the man, and and that community kind of falls apart too, because you've got people that are embedded in many cases. When there are groups of people and the group becomes a potent force or potentially potent force, I guarantee you somebody's been embedded in that group. And the reason they've been embedded in that group is to control the group. And I've told this story before. And it has to do with a documentary. And it was about, I think it was Armor Meat. And it was a town in Minnesota where the meat plant was producing meat there. And the workers went on strike. And they were essentially, told by the union to do this because they wanted more money and more benefits, and there was, plenty of food on the table, so to speak, for everybody, and they wanted more, more. So the union got them all fired up and supported them, and they got them to go on strike. And about 3 months into the strike, the union disappeared, just evaporated. Absolutely evaporated. The guy who was really slick and fiery and passionate and committed is gone. And all those people who went out on strike, they all lost their jobs. I think it was Swift or Armor. Anyway, they all lost their jobs. Replaced by lower wage workers. It's a fascinating documentary. And you can see how a town gets divided. Brothers are crossing picket lines. It's really, really very intense. But the reason I bring it up is because he was embedded. He got right in there, and whose bidding was he doing at that time? Was it the unions? Or was it management? This is what happens when people start to stir. This is what happens when the herd becomes restless. What do? They put somebody in the herd. And they direct the herd. So what I'm watching now is I'm seeing the fallout from all of this. I'm seeing how people get burnt out and burned. And, I saw a guy on my Facebook feed, chemtrails activist, anti-vax activist, and I sat there, I almost cried reading this guy's post. Maybe I'll read it on Monday. We don't really have the time today. Maybe I'll read it on Monday. It's worth sharing, and it's public. So, but it's all about burnout, and it's all about becoming overzealous, and it's all about just trying to do the right thing for his kids and be a stand-up guy and make up for sort of the venal sins of his past. And it's a remarkably candid confessional, and you can tell the guy's on the edge, and something big happened to him. Something really big happened to him, and not in a good way. And this is just 2 drops of the human experience that are involved in this kind of vigilance around trying to retain a sacred, meaningful, organic, sane, real, truthful relationship with this third dimensional plane. Now, you may get people that were at the DAPL pipeline, and they may not feel the same way about vaccines or chemtrails, but they'll feel very strongly about the water. And it's their own piece. And I'm just seeing people fall apart. And if this Corey Goode, David Wilcock thing explodes, and it has the potential to, watch out. There'll be some major fallout from this. Major fallout. Which is unfortunate, because there are a lot of people out there that are looking for answers. And if Corey was indeed coached and guided and all that stuff, that seems to be the prevalent story around it all, it's not going to be good. And maybe Corey was even manipulated himself. Apparently when he was at Contact in the Desert, he was looking like he was about to have a nervous breakdown. That's what the reports were. So we find ourselves at this time in history where things are challenging and difficult and chaotic, and nothing is as it seems. Nothing. Which brings us to Manchester. I'm going to continue to talk about Manchester. Guess what? You've got soldiers on the streets in London, in Manchester, in Liverpool. They're everywhere now. They've been deployed. And I said this was going to happen, that this was the next step. Now, in France, after Bataclan and these other events, Nice, hasn't gone away. The police presence, the police force has not gone away. They're still there. Still there. So I talk about this with Darren, and I'll play that in about 10 minutes. I interviewed about 10 minutes. And he seems to think that the police or the soldiers are going to go away. I'm not so sure. They may thin them out a bit, because it's going to be very heavy-handed up through the election. They may thin them out a bit, but I don't think they're going away. Because, as I said last week and this week, it's all about the gasification of the planet, which is coming. So there are a couple of interesting things that have taken place with some children that were supposed to be missing. They have these missing flyers, these collages of missing kids. They were part of the Ariana Grande concert. Last seen at Ariana Grande, missing. Well, one of the mothers of one of those girls that were reported missing, well, she chimed in, and she basically said that her daughter, the one that they've claimed is missing, she's been dead. That's right. She's been dead. Let me read this to you. This is an interesting piece here. This might be the other one. Oh yeah, there's two of them. Let me read you this one. There are two instances of missing girls who really, well, weren't missing. A mother woke to hundreds of messages of concern after her daughter's photo was plastered all over Twitter as a potential victim at the Manchester terror attack. The only problem? Rachel Devine's daughter, Gemma, was in Melbourne. The 12-year-old was safe in Australia, but someone had mistakenly used Gemma's photo on Twitter, claiming the girl was lost in the panic scenes following the deadly blast at the Ariana Grande concert. Rachel, a blogger and photographer, has now used social media to correct the misinformation among the hundreds of desperate appeals for lost children sought in the mayhem. My daughter is in the black hat, a red lipstick. She is safe in Australia. Someone stole her photo. Interesting. According to Gemma's mother, someone used a photo of Gemma on a fake Twitter account profile claiming she was a friend of the 12-year-old. Here's the quote. I had many messages online asking me if Gemma was okay with screenshots of her photo online, Devine told KidSpot. I've been calming fears all over the internet since that Gem was safe and nowhere near the event. I just thought, why? What purpose does that serve? As for the person who used it this way, I just don't understand. I can only imagine that it had nothing to do with my daughter specifically, and more that the image was easily found and used to get attention for the poster. Devine believes the image of her daughter may have come from the 12-year-old's Instagram account. So here we have one instance of an identity that had been appropriated. Let me give you another one here. This is from the mirror.co.uk. Mom horrified after picture of daughter murdered by ex used in collages of missing in Manchester. Samantha Shrewsbury was shocked to see images of Jaden Parkinson, who was murdered by her ex-boyfriend and dumped in a graveyard, circling online. The mother of a murdered teenager has blasted trolls who used her daughter's photo in collages of missing people. In the Manchester bombing, Samantha Shrewsbury was horrified to see images of Jaden Parkinson, 17, who was murdered by her ex-boyfriend and dumped in a graveyard, circulating online. Ben Blakely strangled Jaden in Didcot when she told him she was pregnant and was jailed for 20 years in 2014, but her mom, Samantha, was horrified to see a selfie snapped by Jaden among images of people being searched for after the Manchester bombing, and spoke of the damage this could cause. On Tuesday, she wrote on Twitter, "Why is my murdered daughter's picture being used in a collage of pictures missing dead after last night's terror attack? We don't even know where the collage has come from," Samantha, 50, said. "It is hard enough for me on a daily basis without having to see her picture. It takes away from the actual tragedy of people having missing children. And it's something those parents are going to have to cope with forever and ever." So this is unusual. We have a young girl whose photo was used. And by the way, my heart goes out to this woman, this mother. Jesus. I mean, this is heartless. If these kids' photos have been grabbed and are being used to politicize an event that may or may not have happened the way that we think it happened, that's horrific, man. That's just cruel. Especially this one woman whose daughter is actually dead. Now, there are a few other photos that have come up and been unusual, to say the least, and create this sense of, well, here we go. There's some abnormalities here. Things don't fit. And we're trying to piece together what exactly went on. Meanwhile, people are raging. Don't you ever, 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 ever claim within the first 2 hours that this was a false flag. Have some respect, have some decency. And to some extent, yeah, I guess. We need to have some respect and some decency, but we can hold that in place and say, guess what? I'm going to hold that respect and decency. And if something happened to somebody in these events, fine, great. My heart goes out to these people. But in the meantime, I'm going to take one step back. So I don't want to jump right in and have my emotional signal played. And in the meantime, if I have any interest in dissecting this and trying to figure it out, that's my right. That's my right. Because the media has been completely and utterly useless for the last 50 years, maybe even longer, when it comes to being objective, being a true participant in our process as the real fifth column. It is, what do they call it, the fourth estate? It's let us down miserably. So we get into some other material here. This is a pretty interesting website. I've followed Anarfan for quite a few years now. I started to post some material from it's a Angerfan, but the URL is aanirfan.blogspot.com. And there's a really thorough vetting of what happened at Manchester as it relates to the young man who is supposedly involved in this. And we're talking about Salman Abedi. And there's some interesting things about Salman Abedi. I'm not going to get into the whole article here, but I'm going to bring up some of the pieces that are important. Let me just try to nail some of these down here. Okay, so Salman Abedi's father, Ramadan Abedi, is reportedly a member of the Abdelhakim Belhad's Islamic Fighting Group, also known as the LIFG. Belhad had worked with the U.S. and NATO to overthrow Gaddafi. Okay, so what we're doing now is we're connecting dots. The Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, the LIFG, has a large presence in the Manchester area. LIFG is now being linked to the Manchester Arena attack. LIFG works for the CIA and its friends. Detectives have linked the alleged Manchester Arena attacker Salman Abedi to the Mossad, CIA, terror attacks in Paris in 2015 and in Brussels. 2016, Mohammed Abrini, he's a guy under suspicion. He's also connected to this. He's connected to Salman Abedi. So these guys are Libyan. It says Zakaria Boufassel gave money to Mohammed Abrini, who was involved in the November 2015 Paris attacks and the 2016 Brussels bombings. Boufassel gave £3,000 to Mohammed Abrini in a park in Small Heath, Birmingham in July 2015. Boufassel says he was approached by MI5, held several meetings with MI5 agents and was paid by MI5. His claims can now be published after an order banning mention of his alleged links to security services was lifted at Kingston Crown Court. This is interesting. Why was Salman and his family given an asylum in the UK when the family was known to the security services? Why was Salman allowed to travel freely between Libya and the UK? One can assume that Salman and family worked for the security services. Authorities told ABC News they found a kind of bomb-making workshop in Salman Abedi's home, and he had apparently stockpiled enough chemicals to make additional bombs. However, according to the UK police, no bomb-making equipment was found at Salman Abedi's house. Interesting. So what the author of this piece here is trying to connect is that the Arab Spring was a CIA Mossad operation. And the same people who created the Arab Spring are behind what's happening with these quote-unquote terror events. Now, what he's saying is that this was an actual event and that the backpack that Salman Abedi had was not a functionally explosive backpack, but instead there was a bomb that had been detonated away from, well, the detonation took place away from the actual concert hall. But the bomb was in there, right? So it was a remote detonator. So this is what he's putting together here, that there are deep ties to the CIA, to Mossad, and ISIS, and Al-Qaeda, which doesn't exist, which is an interesting piece. Let me read you this about Al-Qaeda. This will give you some background about Al-Qaeda. The so-called Al-Qaeda that we see are actually Kharjis, along with Mossad, CIA, and RAW-led and trained mercenary gangs like TPP, who pose as Islamic jihadists and create justification for global information war and propaganda to launch a new war against another Muslim country. The truth is, there is no Islamic army or terrorist group called Al-Qaeda, and any informed intelligence officer knows this. But there is propaganda campaign to make the public believe in the presence of an identified entity representing the devil in order to drive TV watchers to accept a unified international leadership for war against terrorism. The country behind this propaganda is the United States, and this is from former British Foreign Secretary Robin Cook, Inter-Services Intelligence. Cook died while hiking in the Scottish Highlands. So he kind of blew the cover on Al-Qaeda. I'd say more than kind of he did. So what the author here is trying to do is piece together like who's actually really behind all of this. And he's essentially saying that something actually happened here. And I think, again, and it kind of dovetails with the Seth Rich piece, in that, we don't really completely know what happened with Seth Rich. I mean, we theoretically we know he's dead, but is he really dead? And there's all the various anomalies inside the Seth Rich case, which make it difficult to kind of wrap our heads around. And Steve and I were talking earlier today, and there's a congressman down here in Texas that thought, hey, why don't we open a murder investigation into this? And he was ripped by CNN. Absolutely ripped. Because now what they're doing is they're using the Seth Rich case as a way to shut down people who are an investigation in truth. Remember, when the whole Pizzagate thing happened, it was quite small, and it got much bigger, but it was still very fringy, right? Like, who wants to really get into pedophilia and all the creepy spirit cooking and all the stuff that goes along with it? I mean, who's got the stomach for that? It's a small and select group of people, because if you really think about it, it's pretty horrific. But the Seth Rich thing goes to a much wider audience because he had all the bona fides, right? He loved America. He wanted to make a difference. He had a girlfriend. He had trouble. He loved drinking beer. He loved talking sports. I mean, so when he goes down, there's a lot of kind of self, interest involved in his death. It's bigger. It's a wider scope than Pizzagate, and yet the same thing is happening. Now they're using this as just a way to shut down people and to keep the dialogue to a minimum around these events. Move ahead, keep on moving. Nothing here to see. Keep moving. Nothing here to see. But it's more than that. It's a tool to shut down any kind of discussion, dialogue, truth, investigation. And as I was talking about yesterday at my show, Sean Hannity's walking his Seth Rich stuff back. And by the way, I'm still waiting for the big Kim.com disclosure. Is it out there? I haven't seen it yet. If it is out there, send me a link. I want to check it out. But I did not have high hopes for the Kim.com smoking gun with Seth Rich. But again, here we go. Manchester, similar. Lots of missing pieces. Lots of things that are anomalous and hard to explain. And this gets into where we are with reality, or whatever version of reality is we're dealing with. It's very hard to, drill down and say, well, this is it now. This is what happened. These are the perps, and this was the motivation. It's just not that clear cut anymore. And it's that sense of indefinable conclusion. There's that sense that there's no closure on anything. That we just keep opening all these programs. Like on a computer, we've got this program open, and this program open, and this program open, and this program open, and this program open. And eventually what will happen if you've got too many programs open, your computer seizes up and stops being functional. And then it shuts down and crashes. And, I think we're capable of great things, but it's very difficult for us to continue to take on all this information, all these, and the programs. It's difficult when there's no closure. The chemtrail people have been fighting this fight now for 10 years, and very little seems to happen. And that program is still open for a lot of people. And the vaccine people, and you just add it all up, and these programs, they just don't close. So they're running in the background, and they're going to burn the computer out and crash and then burn the computer up. Do you see what I'm saying? So we're going to have to continue to navigate through these times with some level of awareness and art, to be honest with you, if we're going to get through. All right, so why don't I do this? Why don't I get into the discussion with Darren? And it's going to last us about 40 minutes. And then I'll step back and we'll get into the discussion with Steve. All right. The good thing about the Spreaker is I can go over 2 hours. When I had Blog Talk, I just had to do 2 hours. That was my limit. I can do 5 hours a day here. How about that? All right. So I think I'm pretty sure this is Darren Williams from Liverpool this morning. And I'll be back. You're listening to the Friday FARcast. I'm Robert Phoenix. And let me just cue this up, see what we got here. On the heels of what happened in Manchester on the 22nd, Darren Williams, all the way from Liverpool, wanted to share some of his thoughts and some of his perceptions about the event. And it's always great to have Darren on. Of course, Darren being the author of Daz Alt Theory, which is his Gadfly Twitter page, Twitter account. And Darren, thanks for coming on to the show today. Always a pleasure to have you. Unfortunate circumstances in your country on the 22nd. Of course, we can get into some of that 22 symbolism that everybody is quite well aware of. But what I really wanted to get the sense from you, Darren, is What's the attitude like after this event that has taken place? And we'll get into the event itself, but I just want to get into the fallout from what happened in Manchester earlier this week.
Well, hello everybody. Just to let everybody know, where I live is a town in the northwest of England known as Liverpool, which is historically linked to Manchester. The very first train journey occurred from Liverpool to Manchester on Stephenson's steam train known as the Rocket. It left Liverpool and arrived at Manchester. So the two cities basically changed the world with that one journey and invention. The two cities are 30 minutes apart via car journey. Via train, it's a generally 45 to maybe 55-minute journey, depending on what train you get. So it's very common for people who live in Liverpool to actually work in Manchester and vice versa. Pardon me, hay fever. The other thing that Manchester and Liverpool are linked by is because Manchester is the bigger of the two cities, they host more concerts of big, well-renowned world acts. So their stadium, you've got at least 3 or 4 major arena and stadia that people can go to see. Bruce Springsteen, Aerosmith, Bon Jovi, Eminem, Beyonce, Morrissey, The Who,
Ariana
Grande. So a lot of people from Liverpool will make the journey on a regular basis to Manchester to see mentioned acts. So this was why Liverpool has been affected by this tragedy, because some of the 22, I think 2 of the 22 are actually from Liverpool. So that's affected it, and I think another 2 who are currently critical are also from Liverpool or the Merseyside region. So it's,
let me stop you there for a second, because this is an interesting point, and we're going to get into it at some point. So we may as well drop into it now since you brought it up. You're talking casualties. You're talking people in critical condition. There's of course always now this sense that these events are staged. They're false flags. There's footage of a drill that took place 10 days before the event in Manchester. What's your take on this? Did something really happen there? Was it another false flag, and are we being manipulated? I mean, you're obviously not in Manchester. You're in Liverpool, but you're fairly close. And you're close to the material, and you know this other kind of reality that we've all been trying to dissect and decode. What's your take on this? Real or not real, Darren?
One of the things I would say, this conversation we're having, I will transmit and spread via social media to people who aren't interested or aware of this type of alternative thinking. For the record, I do believe that governments and corporations and people with money and power are very willing to stage events for their own advantage, but the cost of that is innocent people being murdered, injured, financially troubled, etc. So I can state on the record, I firmly believe that September the 11th was such a false flag event. Evidence of that is something known as the magic passport of 9/11. If anybody is sceptical on what we're talking about, please look at the magic passport of 9/11. It was even mentioned in the 9/11 Commission, and even the 9/11 Commission themselves couldn't believe it was possible. So if you still believe that's possible, well, that's up to you, but I don't. And another basis of what we're talking about to the audience is that there was something known as Gladio, which occurred in Italy in the early 80s, in which the Italian political class were worried that the Communist Party of Italy would win in upcoming general elections. They staged a number of bombings, the worst being at Bologna train station, to pin the blame on the communists. It actually worked, and the political class stayed in power. So it was later proven to actually be the fault of the political class and various right-wing elements of it, the Italian military. So these things people do occur. Now in this case, I don't think it was a false flag. The reason why I don't think it was a false flag was because we're currently close to a general election in the United Kingdom.
Right.
The Conservative Party, under the leadership of Theresa May, who has been promoting herself as a strong and stable leader against the Marxist, I would say, Jeremy Corbyn, who is with Labour. When she announced the election, a snap surprise election, they had 25% lead on Labour because of May's lack of confidence in public speaking, willing to meet Corbyn in a one-on-one debate, which, unlike America, is optional. Whereas in America, the two candidates for the prize actually have to meet each other on 3 occasions. In Britain, it's optional. Theresa May, who said she was strong and stable, then basically chickened out. And from that, and then various policies on pensions, on education, on the reinstating of fox hunting, when Britain is an animal lover's paradise. Sometimes people think more of animals than people in this country, which has always puzzled me. It's gone from 25% lead to just 6%. Because of the bombing in Manchester, campaigning was halted until today, and it's still at 6%. Also, the reason why I think it was not a false flag was yesterday we have a political show on the BBC known as Question Time.
So let's I want to get there. Let's clarify this just quickly for people that are listening. When we use the word false flag, 9/11 was a false flag, and there were people that died in 9/11. Sandy Hook was a false flag, and it's dubious whether anybody actually died at Sandy Hook. So they're both false flags. The difference between the two of them is that one of them, they're actual casualties, and the false flag is used to move an agenda forward. In the other event with Sandy Hook, there were no casualties, theoretically, and there was still an agenda that was being moved forward. And the definition of the false flag comes from, the days when we were out at sea and ships would have one flag, and a ship would come in thinking it's an ally, and that ship that would have the flag that appeared to be an ally would then turn on that ship and then plunder them or destroy them, hence the name or title false flag. So we just want to be clear about the definition of what false flag is. So this theoretically could be a staged event. We'll get into the nature of it, but in this case, you are saying that there were people that were actual victims, and that they had actually died, injured, wounded, etc., correct?
Yeah, I would definitely say that. And as I was saying, we have a weekly politics show called Question Time every Thursday evening on BBC One television. And they had the current Home Secretary. It was in Salford. It might have been in the famous Salford Boys Club that the Smiths stood outside in the famous photo of the Smiths. Mm-hmm. And the current Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, just by her reactions, she was totally perplexed, because there were people from the Muslim community within the audience, and they were clashing amongst themselves. Some said that the government needed to be draconian and actually start closing down mosques, and specifically mosques that had money from Saudi Arabia promoting the Wahhabist faith of Islam. and then they had others who basically said that they were scaremongering and they were almost sellouts and they were want to be white people. So when the Home Secretary was seeing this internal debate within Muslim audience members, I could see from the look on her face, because she's just a white woman from the south of England, looks like she's like come from, which is nothing wrong with that. She's come from a place with majority white people, and it looks like it's very middle class and quaint and traditionally English. And Amber Heard just had the look of somebody that just did not have a clue on how to resolve this issue. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is the Conservatives, who are the ruling party, who are actually in panic mode because their leader, the rumours are Theresa May suffering severe anxiety, panic attacks during this campaign and process for the general election. Mm-hmm. They haven't benefited from this in terms of percentage. Like, actually, who seems to be benefiting is Corbyn, because Corbyn has come out last night and he actually started the campaigning, and he said that Britain and its military industrial complex needs to look carefully at their behaviour in other parts of the world, mm-hmm. because it results in blowback. So basically what occurs is you get these people are suddenly your allies, you give them arms, they get a taste for blood, and there's an old Chinese saying that basically once a man gets a taste for blood, that means murder. He needs to kill and kill and kill. It's an addiction. And this suicide bomber, we found out last night from the BBC, he completed his high school education. Then in the summer, him and his father went to Libya to fight for a man called Belhaj, who is an absolute psychopath, against Colonel Gaddafi. And then a few months later, father and son returned to Manchester. So this young lad has just had a taste for murder and an expertise, and he's been taught it, and he wishes to most probably fulfill his God complex by targeting this content. And the other interesting thing, he was the similar age of the people that he murdered, because he realised the pop culture and he had that insight and sophistication, because just as they grew up with Ariana Grande through Disney, he grew up with her. So he precisely knew the target that would get maximum damage. So it comes back to haunt them. We've also found out through the BBC last night that the so-called liberal mosque in Didsbury in Manchester that the suicide bomber went to, the current imam was a commander against Gaddafi in Libya. So you've got another man who's a killer, who's walking among us. It isn't like these guys are British soldiers who you know who they are and you can psychologically vet, and you know other people are looking at them. There's a support network like the Royal British Legion, and the Army's got like post-traumatic stress disorder clinics. These people, we don't know who they are, but what happens is they're useful tools, they're useful idiots. But what happens is they come back in our communities, and this is the result, because it's not so much about Wahhabism or spreading Islam. I just think it's like a serial killer. It's just a need, a desire to murder and kill, and notoriety.
So let me ask you a question. Obviously, you would probably see different footage of that event that we would see here. How would you describe the footage? Did you see? Was there blood? Was there excess of, human body parts? I mean, what were the British public allowed to see of this event?
Well, the British public were one of the things because Britain geographically is a very compact place.
Yeah.
Its degrees of separation are a lot more tighter than America. America, in terms of landmass, is a continent. You know, it's from sea to shiny sea.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very compact island, so it's small with a hell of a lot of people in. And because of transient nature of employment and also university higher education, there's a lot more connections. So what Britain learned from the IRA is that not to actually show anything such as that, because it can cause major delirium, it can cause major anxiety within the population.
Okay, so there is no real footage.
Though there was footage of a taxi driver was parked near to the arena. He saw the explosion of the bomb flash against the side of a facing building.
Right.
You saw people.
So it's one guy, one witness. What else?
You see people running out in the hundreds, if not thousands, out of the steps out of the arena itself, going out of the arena. Other people walking, but as I said, whilst there isn't like body parts as such and graphic stuff, I just think there's a reason for that, and I just think like one of the things that's happened to where I live 3 miles down the road in an area I don't really go to called Halewood is a Muslim man owns a fast food place, and he's been torched. His place has been arsoned, and he believes it's because of somebody that's reacted to what's occurred, and he's Muslim. So I think they have to have a control on this, because there's it can spiral out of control, and it can either go to people like revenge attacks, or people insult each other on the street, or just general anxiety and depression. Mm-hmm. And Britain already has a high amount of anxiety and depression. You've realised this since Brexit, because when they pull the purse strings, when they leave the purse strings of the European Union, Britain's on their own, and they've realised the true economic impact that mental illness has in this country, where people are not going into work or taking time off work. So it has a massive effect on GDP. This is why Prince William, Harry, and also Kate Williams' wife have been doing suddenly huge campaigns on mental health awareness, because they've truly now realised how much it affects the GDP, the bottom line. So if they were to show graphic stuff, I don't know how Manchester's going to recover, because currently Manchester, before the bombing, had the highest suicide rate across all age groups in the United Kingdom. So that's children, people of a working age, OAPs. It has a really high suicide rate. So if they were to show it, it would make it even worse. Mm-hmm. So I can understand why they're being very cautious about this, because ultimately the people that run the country, it's about the money, and they're looking at GDP, and they're looking at what they can get back in tax, and they realise that if this is shown in all its gruesome detail, it will affect people. Manchester's the second largest city in the United Kingdom, so it will have a huge economic impact.
So let's get this clear. You are basically saying that this was a random event that was staged by a young man who had a taste for blood, murder, fueled by an extremist ideology, perhaps, and it just so happens that it was on the 22nd. So this is how your perception of this event is.
What my perception of it is that the Muslim community of Britain currently feels very, very isolated. And one arrest per day before the bombing was occurring in their community around terrorism. So one of the factors is that there was the ideology of suicide bombing that was presented by the Iranians. That then was in an ideological, religious, theological manner promoted by Osama bin Laden's mentors, Zahari, an Egyptian. Now this has been developed by a Chechen, I forgot the man's name, and he basically adds on to it, and he says that Muslims should do these type of acts because it will instill hate and racism within the unbeliever, and eventually the Muslims will have a choice. They will either have to leave the unbeliever's country and relocate back to their Muslim countries of origin, or they will have to join extreme methods to stand up for themselves. So what I think what's occurred is it's a general election. You've got a Prime Minister saying strong and stable, and she's going to be tough on Muslims. So then you've got this guy, and he's just said, right, let's see what happens, because the ultimate aim is, like last night on Question Time, it is to have Muslims argue and fight amongst themselves and get angry. So whilst there could be some sort of beneficial angle like 9/11, I honestly just think what this, pardon my language, but what this was designed for, it was designed just to fuck everything up, and it was designed to basically cause a huge division in England, because what I think is the English aren't like the French. The French will vote for the National Front and Le Pen, but the British won't, because their ancestors fought against the biggest racist there ever was in Adolf Hitler. So to then take right-wing extremist white national ideology, to them it would be betraying what their ancestors did. But the feelings, which are genuine, which should be explored, just as LGBT people have a right to express themselves, such as Jewish people have a right to express themselves, white people should also have the right to express themselves how they feel. But because of political correctness, these feelings are in them. And when Brexit occurred, the polls lied, because people lied to the pollsters. A lot of white people in Britain voted for Brexit because of immigration, but publicly to their friends on social media, they would never say it. Some people apparently never even told the people he were married to.
Right. This is very much in alignment with the Trump election in the United States. Very clear, very similar patterns involved where people, and this is where I think it gets, it's unfortunate because, the kind of the immediate go-to is that, well, people have been suppressing their racism for years. So this is an opportunity for them to vote silently, quietly, privately, and exercise their racism as part of a vote. I don't believe that. I don't agree with it. But it's a kind of a commonly held theme when it comes to these types of elections and the movement towards nationalism or return towards nationalism. Let me ask you another question here. First of all, I'm not in England, so I can't really deal with the facts on the ground, but I understand how these things work. And I'm still dubious and skeptical of who was actually behind it, how it was promoted, and if indeed it was sufficiently real. I have that right to reserve from this point of view. But at the end of the day, and this is what I've been talking about with my listeners, whether it's real or not, the same results are going to be initiated and enacted. And you and I were talking beforehand, before we started to hit the record button. I asked you, well, so is there a large troop presence on the streets? And you said, absolutely. And not like I'm some great oracle, but it was not that hard to predict that the next thing was going to happen. You were going to have boots on the ground in England right after that happened. And what we've seen in France, after Bataclan and whatever happened in Nice, that those boots on the ground have not gone away. I mean, they're a constant presence now in most urban areas in France. And my feeling is that what you're going to have in England is something very similar. And you're going to have troops on the ground there 24/7. And in these dense urban areas, you'll have even more. And you already got the highest degree or highest rate of CCTV cams on the planet. So England's already wired for facial recognition. And the next step in that regard would be biometrics. What's happening, or what have you heard around things like biometrics and greater security, and greater surveillance, and all these buzzwords that come out after an event like this?
What I think is Britain is caught in a paradox, and what it is, it tries to be metropolitan liberal, and it tries to promote itself as a very pro-diversity, we're all in it together. So one of the examples was there was this a vigil at Manchester Town Hall to commemorate what happened at the arena and to make everyone come together. And it was like Sikhs were part of it, and the Jewish community, and white people were there.
So now we have the opportunity to unify.
So what I think is the British political class and the media, they promoted this metropolitan liberal diversity type of agenda. But the reality is that we're not all together, and there's huge problems of inequality, poverty. One of the things that amazed me 2 years ago was it was announced that the least achieving category in high school education in Britain are working class white boys. Working class black boys used to have the infamy of that position. Now working class black boys are outdoing their white counterparts. And what's occurred is that these people, who themselves ironically are white, they have created this thing of, we're one big happy family. But when you then try to tell them the realism, we're not one happy family and there are things that are wrong, they then say you're negative, or you're racist, or you're a troublemaker, or you're a troll, and all of these things. So in terms of soldiers on the street, it can't actually occur because they've created this false paradise that we're all one happy family. And if they, the political class and the media, the mainstream media, justify British soldiers being on the street, their paradise is proven to be false. So they would rather, and we've got to remember the metaphor in a way, or the anecdote of the Titanic. They knew that ship was sinking, but some people were that proud, they would rather go down with the Titanic than get a lifeboat, because it was Britain's and the Empire's greatest achievements. So this is the strangeness of Britishness, whereas in France they will have them on the street forever, because basically they're scared of what the suburbs will do, that are majority Muslim, to the cities, but they're also worried about what white people will do to them. So it's basically the soldiers are the referees, basically the enforcers. But in Britain, I can't see that happening because they've invested in this false fallacy that we're all happy, clappy, one family. And as somebody who's black and white, when I talk to white people and when I talk to some black people about my reality, because they're so metropolitan liberal, they just don't want to hear it. So I think soldiers will be on the street, but they'll be quickly taken off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds. I have my own sort of theories around this, and my theory is that if you look at Gaza, Palestine, and the model of living, if that's what you could call it there, I think that that's the planned model for the rest of the world at some point, and that the world will be based on checkpoints and all kinds of very intense security measures, and there'll be people that'll be constantly policing, and there'll be this, the vigil of the sentinel, so to speak. And those sentinels at some point would be replaced by artificial intelligence and the robot security forces. And I know this sounds really far-fetched, but this is
Minority Report. It's just like the film Minority Report, isn't it? That's like you'll go into a shopping mall and it will have a scanner and it will scan you in like a couple of milliseconds.
That's right.
And it will know exactly what's in your bag.
And those technologies are already there. They're already there. They're just waiting to be put into place for the right reasons and to get public money. And that's really where the cash cow is. It's in public money. If you have a business that is attached to the government, and the biggest businesses that are attached to the government presently are all about security and surveillance. It's a huge economy. And if you can get into that pocketbook, not only is that going to give you an initial amount of startup cash, well, not startup cash, but initial amount of funding, but you could actually, mine that for quite a long time, as long as there are enough events in the world to make people feel unsafe and insecure. Well, give me one kind of 40,000 foot feeling about what's happening there. What's the general vibe? How are people feeling? And what do you think happens next from this point?
Well, one of the things I've always believed, it was actually promoted by a comedian, Patrice O'Neill, and you can watch it on YouTube. He's doing a stand-up in Los Angeles. If you just do Patrice O'Neill stand-up Los Angeles, he talks about the nature of race, and he's very blunt. And one of the things he says is that, and this is very controversial, he says one of the things is that within white people, specifically white men, there is a thing about subjugating the earth. And one of the things he expresses is that a white man will climb to Mount Everest because Mount Everest is there, and a black man will say, no way, I'm staying on the ground. And basically, there is something within white people that are explorers. Even the comedian Cat Williams does a funny stand-up about the differences between black people and other races, and the need that black people should have white friends, and that's on YouTube. And he talks about the notion of black people are explorers and they're just very happy just to live out the living. They don't want to go in the jungle and do things and do what Bear Grylls does and stuff like that. So I think my fear is that there will be so many of these type of events. Eventually you could have, like what happened in Nazi Germany, you could have a crystal night where basically linked with social media, somebody just decides, right, let's just throw a petrol bomb in a mosque, and then it just goes viral, and then the whole society from that one tragic moment is changed forever.
Right.
Because people like myself, I'm not Muslim, I've got no interest in being a Muslim, that's just my point of view. But because I'm an ethnic minority and my appearance does look more black than white, I will then get sucked into it, and then it will cause greater things. And there's even something that's gone viral on the BBC where there's a black man who's from Manchester, and he's having a furious debate with somebody from the Didsbury Mosque that the said suicide bomber attended, and it's Imam, who was also a commander against Gaddafi, and he was having a point and like shouting at him, saying, "You lot need to sort this out," because that could have been my 14-year-old daughter, and she likes Ariana Grande, and I couldn't get tickets for that, but I could have been one of the parents that could have been mourning her death. So you lot have to sort it out. So we could have a situation where the whole UK could end up like sort of like Escape from New York, or just something terrible where it's just total pandemonium.
Right.
And it's literally just it's on racial lines, and it could be on geographic lines.
Don't you think though that there are third parties that love to exploit this divide and conquer mentality, and as a result of that, they'll throw gasoline on the fire, and we'll get events, perhaps like the one that occurred in Manchester, where there is a greater potential for even more discord and more strife. I mean, don't you think that there are people that that have an investment in this?
Well, what I'm scared of, Robert, is because, as I've mentioned, because of white working class or underclass boys not achieving academically, they're not employable. So they're just basically sitting off smoking weed, doing nothing, in high-strain marijuana like skunk and this new synthetic marijuana from China.
So you're basically saying that there's an underclass of underachieving white males who are getting high on toxic weed, and that they could be that they could do anything, that they could be agents of chaos. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, all it needs is just if you get like somebody charming, and you get somebody who looks good and is articulate, you've got a ready-made like army there. You've got millions of young men aged between 13 and 33 who are doing nothing and are angry.
Right.
And a lot of them have no father figure, because obviously the breakup of the family. So even if the mother and father have broke up, the father's just abandoned them. So if you get somebody who can give them a purpose and a need, and that need is based in white nationalism, God help this country, because in the end of the day, the government, the majority of the children in this country go to government-run schools.
Right.
So they've got the data, and they know that white boys are underachieving, and if they now start doing extreme measures, we're going to see panic, because you can stop a brown person in the street. For instance, black people or Afro-Caribbean people make up less than 10%, I think 9.6% of the UK population. So you can easily point them out, identify them, stop and search them on the street. People from the Indian subcontinent and the Middle East you can pick out. But when it's white people doing it, then anybody can do it. And that's when the pandemonium and panic happens. But maybe there's a Machiavellian genius that wants this to occur, and then all of us, as you say, are in this Gaza-like prison where every a mile and a half you have to go to a checkpoint and show them your bag and show them your ID and then explain where you're going, why you're going, and who you're going to see. What is the manner of your journey and the meaning of the journey? So it could become a draconian measure. We've got to remember George Orwell was given inside information that basically the future of England in 1984 would resemble totalitarianism, and Orwell was that shocked he made that blueprint into a book known as 1984. So maybe there's long plans and masterminds of.
Well, I think I think England's been well on the way to 1984 for quite a while. I mean, once you set up the CCTV cam networks, I think you were well inside the 1984 rubric. Well, listen, Darren, this has been a great conversation. It's always interesting to get your take and to kind of understand it from your point of view and how it relates to the rest of England and the overall general sense of things. So thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And
can I just leave just an ending message?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of the things we have to be as alternative researchers is we have to be very sophisticated in our communication. And what we have to do is when there are disasters and tragedies, we have every right to investigate them, but we also have to have a sophistication of when we call it out and what it is. There seems to be a need within the culture where people immediately, within hours, claim it was a false flag and then come with this information. Mm-hmm. What we have to be aware of is that people did die. Let's just be cool with it. Let's be sophisticated. Let's be measured. The information will always be there and the incidents always occur. The incident is in history. So there is no need to be rushing out and doing it. What needs to be done is good investigation, good research, and the right precise time that it is done. Yep. So this conversation was not meant to offend. This conversation was meant to enlighten. If people want to talk to me or communicate with me, I'm available on Twitter at Daz Alt Theory. That is as in a scientific theory, not the theory of Tinkerbell. So if you want to get in contact with me, and if you love it, if you hate it, please do. But again, this conversation was not meant in any way to be offensive, but it was meant to be enlightening. So thank you for the opportunity, Robert. Hey,
Darren, always my pleasure, and good luck on your half marathon.
Oh, God, with soldiers and guns and Chinook helicopters.
Yeah, make sure you wear a flak jacket. That was Darren Williams from this morning, giving his assessment of England in the aftermath of Manchester. And I don't always agree with Darren, but I like to hear his point of view because I think something much bigger is going on. And he's looking at it from a nationalist perspective. And I also think that Darren is very keen on racial politics, and so he's bringing up the piece around the young potential white nationalists that could be flipped like a switch through these events that could spawn a level of animosity and hatred. And sure, that could actually absolutely occur. I'm looking at the bigger piece for everybody, and the deepening of the surveillance state, the security state, and it is already in the works. Got some comments here in the chat room. There's no, it's kind of all good now. Yeah, okay. 2 minutes ago, 3 minutes ago. Okay. Thanks, Laura, and thanks for following the show and listening. I'm going to queue up another piece here that I did this morning with Steve Crimi, and let me see if I can figure out. I've never played, let's see, 2 decks before. So let me bring this out of here. We're going to get rid of that, and let me see if I can just play this and see what happens here. and bring it over to one of the decks, although I'll try to bring it over to a deck and see what happens. So we got here. I think we got it. I think it's good. All right, so I'll set the stage for you. This is from this morning. This is me and Steve Crimi and Chris on the wing. And we were talking about Eris and myth and war. And Steve has some really interesting things to share about it, about the whole process and the modern mythos that we are now encircled by when it comes to chaos and the potential for war. All right, here's me and Steve. It's about a half an hour ride. Have a listen. I'll be back in 30 minutes, and we'll wrap this thing up on the Friday FARcast on Robert Phoenix. On the last Friday of every month, it's kind of a new feature of the show where we bring on my friend Steve Crimi and Chris, who's almost like his spirit guide, hanging in the background over there. And Steve and Chris are the publishers of Logosophia Press, and of course Steve's been on the show before and the author of Katabatic Wind. And we've come up with this idea that Steve can drop in and sort of give his modern take on mythos and how it's relating to sort of this crazy world we're living in. And Steve said that he wanted to talk about Eris and war and the connection between it all. And I thought, well, this sounds really amazing. So let's get into it, Steve. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Robert. Good to be here.
Yeah. So let's just dive right in.
Yeah.
And get into your interpretation of this Eris myth and what it means to us during this time.
Right. So Eris, Eris. So she's the goddess of chaos in the Roman time. She's the Greek goddess of chaos, I should say. In the Roman time, she's known as Discordia. And so there are a number of forms of chaos, but I'll get into that in a second. I just want to set it up a little bit because you've been really talking for a while about this whole Trump thing and how really the essence of Trump's chart points to chaos and disruption. And it certainly feels that way, just trying to, even just to try to hold on to the details of what's going on is just mind-boggling right now. Nothing is simple. Everything just goes deeper and deeper and deeper into craziness. The whole Seth Rich thing, you think, well, it should be just a simple retribution murder, but no, there's missing time. There's, did he die? What happened in the hospital? Then the whole weirdness with the parents, etc. So you can't even have a simple tale of retribution. Everything just goes further and further into into the labyrinth, really. So I guess one of the things that I like to do, because I'm not really a political analyst, is just try to bring it back into what does this have to do with the sacred. So all of these expressions of chaos in my understanding and my experience really are manifestations of the goddess Eris. And Eris is a goddess, and in the Greek world, and the Greek world is the foundation to our world. The Greek world is everything was divine. So Eris is kind of early on in the pantheon. Now there's also chaos is also a goddess, and chaos is the first born of everything. And just like in the Bible, passing over the waters are always equated with chaos, and that's really the substrate of all being. It's it's the underlying aspect of everything that we are always continuously manifesting from and falling back into. It happens moment to moment, and then of course it happens at the end of our lives. It happens breath to breath. It's what makes the world a spiritual world, is the fact that there is oneness underlying all of it. And so the first thing is this what's called chaos, and really it's more like the unmanifest, the unformed. In Taoism, they call it the uncarved block. So so there's a foundational myth of Eris that is mostly lost, and if you don't mind, I'd like to tell it. It'll take about 5-6 minutes to tell, and it's the myth of how the Trojan War began. So Eris, so there's a wedding that has to be held, and it's actually the people who are getting married are Thetis, and I forget the gentleman's name, but Thetis is eventually becomes Achilles' mother, and Achilles ends up being the hero of the Trojan War. So that's one circle of that story, but that's not necessary for this part. So they have this wedding, and the gods and goddesses are getting together, and they want to have a good time, and they don't want to invite Eris to the party. So no one tells her about it, but of course Eris finds out. So there they are, they're all hanging out at this wedding on Olympus, and mulling about, and the Ambrosia's, really perfect again this year, et cetera, et cetera. And so a knock comes on the door, and it opens up, and there's I guess a nymph or some messenger from Eris on a golden plate with a golden apple. And the golden apple has a little note next to it, and the note says, "For the fairest." So immediately Hera jumps up. Hera is Zeus's wife, the queen of heaven, and she says, "Well, that's obviously for me." And Athena says, "Well, wait a second. The whole Athens is named after me. Why wouldn't it be for me? I'm pretty fair myself." And then Aphrodite says, "Well, obviously I am the goddess of desire and love, and I have to be the fairest." So they start arguing amongst themselves, and they ask the gods to settle. And the gods basically say, we don't want no part of this one. So they pick, through Zeus, I guess it is, they pick this sort of prince, shepherd. He's really a shepherd. Back in those days, princes and shepherds could have been the same thing, of Troy. His name is Paris. And Paris, the three goddesses appear to Paris, and they explain to him the situation. We need you to choose amongst us who is the fairest. And Paris agrees, because you really have no choice when three goddesses appear before you. So Paris agrees to make this choice, I guess like the next day. So in the meantime, Hera comes to him and says, "Look, not for nothing, but, if you pick me, you will be the king of the largest tracts of land in the history of humankind. You'll be known forever as being this great king, and have realms beyond compare." And he nods, and then a little later on, Athena, who is the goddess of wisdom, but it's more like war strategy wisdom.
Yeah.
And she's also the goddess of handicrafts and things like that. Mm-hmm. She's born in full armor, actually, from Zeus's headache. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so she says, "Look, you pick me, and you'll be at the head of the greatest army of all time. I'll be at your side. You'll be undefeated. You'll go down in history as this amazing warrior." So then later on, Aphrodite comes to him and says, "Look, I will have the most beautiful woman in the world fall in love with you." So next day, the goddesses show up. He chooses Aphrodite. So to get the most beautiful woman in the world as his bride, I guess. Mm-hmm. So problem is, the most beautiful woman in the world was the Queen of Sparta, named Helen. And Helen was so Sparta was in mainland Greece. Troy is now in south of Istanbul. Now we're in current day Turkey. And her husband's name is Menelaus. So Paris goes over, and on some sort of diplomatic mission, he goes to meet the king and queen of Sparta. Turns out, so Aphrodite shows up, and she makes Helen fall in love with him. So it wasn't really seduction. It was sort of a divine imperative, I guess.
It was a magical act.
Yeah.
Right.
So then, of course, back in those days, there's something called, and still is in Turkey, if you travel there, there's this very sacred guest-host relationship. When you're traveling in those places, they treat you as a divine when you go and,
I've heard that.
Visit.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And it's really true, and it's still true in Turkey, as we even traveled there 2 years ago. So it's a serious breach of the guest-host contract to leave with the host wife, which is what Paris does. In the middle of the night, he leaves, goes back to Troy, takes her, and she's kind of, she's sort of a semi-willing captive, I guess, how it goes.
Right.
She kind of phases in and out. But the deal is that, all right, so Menelaus then gathers all the kings of mainland Greece, Agamemnon, Odysseus, and the rest. And then what happens is the Trojan War. And the Trojan War goes on for 10 years, and that's a whole other thing. And it really decimates a lot of the aspects of Greece. One, because the Greek heroes act completely ignobly in the war, whereas the Trojan. And so it's interesting that a Greek would write about how bad the Greeks acted during this war. They kind of win it by subterfuge with the famous Trojan horse. And then, all sorts of messy things happen. Achilles dies. Odysseus takes him 20 years to get back. Agamemnon returns home. His wife had taken on a lover. He kills him. Then the son kills her. And that's a whole bunch of Greek tragedies going on. So the upshot of the story really is this connection, and I don't want to fully interpret the story because I really like to let it sit there. But this whole aspect of not inviting chaos, not acknowledging Eris, not acknowledging the need for Eris, and trying to have this sort of perfect anything.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And so down the line, and if you don't allow her in, she's coming in through the back door, actually in this case through the front door, but she's coming in through the back door one way or the other because it's part of everything.
Yeah.
This chaos.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I mean, it's an interesting point. And, from my perspective, because there's so much chaos, that people are really scrambling to put pieces together and have some semblance of order, and out of that order, a comfortable narrative with reality, right, for their lives. And I totally get that. I understand that. And on the other side of this whole chaos phenomenon, you have these theoretical agents of chaos who want their own version of order out of that chaos as well, right? So you have these two parties. The chaos is happening, and then we have this group over here who, to some degree, are at the effect end of the chaos, wanting to understand and put it into perspective, get to the bottom of it, and restore order, whatever that order is. And on the other side, you have the progenitors of chaos, who are at cause, who are engaged in that to have their own version of. It's really a fascinating dynamic.
Right.
And I think this is kind of what you're bringing up.
As part of, and of course, I think isn't it a Masonic?
It is totally Masonic.
Slogan: "Order out of chaos."
Ordo ab chao. That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's So this is So that's exactly one part of it. And the other part of it, which I find really interesting, so going back to, because there's, like I said, there's actually, when you go to Hesiod, there are two versions of Eris. According to him, there's this sort of Eris that hates mankind, which is sort of the war version of chaos. And then there's this sort of necessary aspect of chaos. In other words, a certain amount of chaos makes you move to do anything. There's sort of the chaos of hunger that makes you cook food or something like that.
Right.
And one of the things that I've noticed, though, amongst a lot of our friends here in Asheville, a number of whom are artists, that kind of right where sort of when Trump became sort of the topic of discussion, mostly during the Republican primaries and thereon, where he was really injecting that's where he began with the chaos is totally flummoxing the Republican primary.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he was dealing. He was totally dealing.
Yeah. It was really, it was something to behold.
It really was. I mean, yeah, absolutely.
But I noticed that all my friends who are artists and here, their creativity levels just went up. People were painting and making pots and whatever. It just seemed like a whole new thing. Chris started learning to paint, and she was painting like crazy. And I just not to give him too much credit, but it seems that is another aspect of the chaos as an integral part of creativity.
Absolutely.
That if things are just soft and hanging out, you think about Rumi. Well, Rumi wrote his great poems, while the Mongols were invading and taking over Konya. It wasn't and he had already, his family had already run from Afghanistan and settled in the middle of Turkey. So there's a whole aspect of the chaos and the creativity. And then there's this whole other aspect of it, which comes out of the work of Empedocles. And Empedocles talked about everything in this movement of what he called strife, love and strife. Now, love we called Aphrodite, and strife we can call Eros and Eros or chaos or strife. And so what he has is Eros, not Eros. So what goes on is that it's a movement. Aphrodite or love binds us. So it binds us to things in the world. It keeps us connected because it's desire. And its desire keeps us into the world and away from our origins, which you can call spirituality in one way or another. Mm-hmm. So love binds, and strife releases. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we can hope for on an overall level, I would say, so that this strife actually releases you from connections to a lot of the things in the world and attachments in the world that you don't need to have, and allows you to move back towards that primordial chaos from which we come.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting point.
So that was Empedocles, and it just seems that that's kind of what's going on, because and it's in the face of a lot of things that are going on that are really attempting to prevent this reconnection to the divine. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You can talk about fluoride in the water, which calcifies the pineal gland. Right. Which is one of the ways that our bodies, reconnect. Yep. And just keeping us, and really since the 70s, keeping us in this, especially in this country anyway, spending half of our income just putting a roof over our heads.
That's right. Yeah.
And keeping us just scrambling on that level. Mm-hmm. In the 60s, you could have just, like Jerry Garcia could, teach music, 3 days a week.
Chaos.
And, and then start a band and run the Grateful Dead, or you could be at a bookstore part-time and then write and all these kind of things, and express.
It's so true. I mean, I was watching a documentary on the the Brotherhood of Eternal Love. Those guys out of Southern California who were mm-hmm. the largest creators of LSD in the history of the world, pretty much. And, that's exactly what they did. I mean, they said, hey, we want to, go off and get out of the world. And they found an old church up in the hills, east of Orange County. And who knows how much a church costs. I guarantee it wasn't that much at that time. So they could retreat there and they could start their little world, and coalesce their energies and, create their experience there. You try to do something like that today, and it'd be nearly impossible. That church would be $1.5 million. I mean, there was a time where there was an opening for these kinds of experiences, and that just isn't on the table now. It's a much more commodified, homogenized, top-down, money-driven experience. So where do we go to have those moments where we can retreat or check out or do it affordably so that we can foster our creativity and we can foster our imagination and we can foster the spirit? I think it's one of the problems that a lot of Americans are facing and dealing with.
Yeah, the whole. I mean, it's the whole work thing, and it's it's really slave wages, it's just being a semi-slave, and geez, I've got it good. I've got it, really good. In a lot of ways, and through the publishing company, where a lot of young people and plus we do Airbnb. We see a lot of young people come through, and it's really rough. And I'm glad I'm heading into the last third.
Right. Exactly. Well, I think what you've done here today is I think you've shed some light on a process that is nonlinear and I think is asymmetric, because I think what people are looking for now is how do we get through this time? What are some of the skills? What are some of the things that we can use that we can navigate, and what you're, I think, indirectly bringing up is that chaos has the potential to ignite creativity if we can take ourselves out of this sort of triangulation with it. That there's a potential in there that we can tap into. Am I getting close to this?
Yeah, that's good, and it's also it's also that we have a mythos that we can tap into, that we've lost connection to. We've been completely educated out of these old stories.
Yeah.
That the old, that would be kind of around the campfire, etc. That was part of our culture and have been taken away. And some people are, and they're bringing back, and of course, like something like American Gods, they're coming back in kind of, distorted, postmodern fashion. But there's something in there though. So, so that's good.
You asked me if I had been watching that, and I've only seen some scenes from it. Are you watching American Gods?
Yeah, I got a friend who sends me them, so I've watched 4 episodes, and actually, once you get past the bloodbath of the first episode, the storytelling is really good. And it's just it's moving. I think it's moving way slow for most people.
I love Ian McShane. Ian McShane is great.
So I do recommend it.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't you, when the series is over, why don't let me see if I can catch up on it, and then you and I can have a discussion about it. That would be fun.
Yeah. I think it's a good place to go. But so just to get back to what you originally said, stories is one way of dealing with it. They sort of, even just reading some of these old texts, things that have been written that come from some sort of a sacred perspective. Of course, people are trying to meditate. Yoga has become commodified. But the other thing I would say, even just growing a little bit of your own food. Yeah. Growing it organically and making that connection in the garden. We're very lucky. We have this wonderful garden. Mm-hmm. But anybody can grow something in a pot. If you got a deck or anything in the sunshine, community gardens. And maybe someday we can talk about biodynamics, which is, which works specifically to put spiritual qualities into the food. And anyone can look up biodynamics and find a biodynamic CSA or farm near them, and they, and eat that food, because as Alan Chadwick, somebody whose work we've published, said, the divine needs something to hang its coat on.
Yeah.
So it needs an internal structure of us.
Yeah.
And if we're eating, Monsanto, glyphosate infused foods and all that stuff, the divine doesn't have anything to hang its coat on. But what does have the ability to hang its coat on, are this sort of mechanical things.
Right, the synthetic consciousness, yeah.
And you can lead on to AI, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely, yes.
So that's a really important start, because that's one of the few things left that we can control right now.
Yeah, good point. Great point.
So that's maybe that's enough for today, I guess.
Well, no, it's good. It's good. I mean, I think it's opened up something for people. And earlier on, before we started the little talk here, when I first called you up this morning, I was telling you how I'm seeing people in great deal of distress in their lives, and really sort of the same kinds of burnout that activists get in large numbers, and I think that we've got to have not just coping mechanisms, but strategies for wellness and thriving. And this is, I think, a really good step in that direction, getting people to re-examine and even relearn the myths, from a different perspective now in many ways. So I think it's good.
Yeah, and what you do, because, like I said, like I told you earlier too, that a lot of our friends, run when they see us coming. So, so this form, I mean, it's a virtual community, yes, but there's something real about it. And, so what you do in making that available, it's really a positive thing, I think. It's a service to people who do feel isolated and watching, like we were watching this guy from your state, Blake Farenthold.
Yeah.
You know this guy?
Which one is he?
Congressman?
Yeah.
He's a congressman from your state.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just happened to see a video, and he just brought up the question of, well, maybe we need an investigation into Seth Rich's murder. And the CNN anchors were blasting him, wouldn't let him get a word in.
Yeah.
It was horrible.
Yeah.
It was horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a whole other.
And that's what my friends watch.
Yeah. That's a whole other sort of discussion.
So any antidote to it, any opening, and any sane examination, because the answers are really, as we said, they're very deep in the labyrinth.
They are really deep. And I'll tell you the one thing, and before we sign off here, that really boggles my mind is that if indeed Seth Rich was killed, and he was killed for all the reasons that people who connect the dots think he was killed for, and there was a suppression of the Bernie Sanders campaign and everything that went along with that, and theoretically he lost his life for that, I would assume that your community and your friends and your group of fellow artists and artisans and thinkers would want to be invested in that, because I'm assuming that they probably like Bernie Sanders. Right? I mean, you just follow the chain of logic here, and they would say, well, we want to get to the bottom of this because everything got hijacked and this young man lost his life for it, if that is indeed the case.
Yeah.
And yet they won't do it, because if that is the case, and it is linked to WikiLeaks, and it is linked to Assange, then it takes the Russia thing out of the equation for Trump, and it takes away their ability to extract what they deem to be the immediate threat. Am I right?
Yeah, and they don't want. Yeah, people don't want to lose. They don't want to lose their narrative, and have to have that. I mean, take it back to 9/11 too. No one wants to go there because of all that it implies.
Yeah.
And because it implies that you've been, and I have too. I have to admit that I was supporting these horrible people for a long time.
Yeah.
At party.
Yeah. People don't like to be shown that they've been duped.
No, hoodwinked.
Yeah. It gets into our shame wheelhouse, which we all have plenty of, I think, in our.
Right, but that's part of growth. It's part of spiritual growth to realize you're off. To realize that everything's shifting and you got to shift with it.
Yep.
And it's a struggle. People want to just be comfortable.
Yeah.
And I can understand, but but there are other options if you want to get to the real.
Yeah.
You have to be real.
Yeah, I think you have to be willing to constantly recalibrate.
Yeah, and you too do that. I know you have. I know that you guys have been adjusting your sails along your path for a long time now, and that takes a lot of courage to do that. So,
and it'll happen again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, thanks again for coming on today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
See you.
And Robert, thank you so much. It's really like food for us to listen to you.
Well, I'm glad I'm able to provide something, and you've just added to the food today. How about that?
Right.
You brought your own biodynamic menu to the show today. All right, let's bring you on again in another 4 weeks. We'll see you in 4 weeks, and we'll talk some more. Sound good?
Good.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Steve. That was writer, publisher, big thinker, Steve Crimi from Logosophia Press. From this morning, talking about the myth of Eris. I want to thank Steve for coming on, and we'll have him again. Have him on again in about 4 weeks from now. Last Friday of every month for about a half an hour. Just sharing his perspective. If you want to find out more about Steve's work, his books, and the authors that he publishes, go to logosophiapress.com or logosophia.com. You'll find it, Logosophia. That's where it's happening. It is 1:54. We got about 6 minutes here till the top of the hour and wrap things up. You've been listening to the Friday FARcast, kind of a long player, and it is kind of a return to other times where we had 2 hours worth of really stretching out with interviews and guests, and I enjoyed doing that. Although Steve wanted to just unfurl that myth, and that was just great. Being able to hear that. So we'll be back on Sunday night, and we'll be doing the live stream with some astrology. We have the new moon coming in on Thursday, the new Gemini moon. It's been a chaotic week, man. Super chaotic. So it came in yesterday. I got into a fender bender yesterday under the Gemini moon. Crazy fender bender. Not a big deal. But the circumstances around it were strange. A little bizarro. Well, here we go. We get to go into the weekend, the long weekend, the Memorial Day weekend. It's always an interesting weekend for me to revisit. Back in 2000 and... was that 2001? 2001? Yeah, it was 2001. 2002. 2002. Memorial Day weekend 2002. I got married in Las Vegas. So there we go. An interesting moment in time. If you've never been married in Las Vegas, I highly recommend it. As long as you can be open to an annulment about 48 hours later. No, I mean, sometimes Vegas weddings work out. Mine lasted 7 years. A lot longer than a lot of people thought. But it's hey, maybe they can have a virtual reality version of a Vegas wedding. You don't have to. You can go through it, but not really go through it. You know what I'm saying? It can be fun, especially at the virtual level. All right, so we're wrapping it up here, and I hope you enjoyed today's show and got some some nutrients, some biodynamic nutrients out of both episodes with Darren. And Steve will be back on Sunday night with the live stream. We'll be back on Monday with 15 minutes of flame. And I guarantee you the world will have spun and it'll be different. 48 hours from now, we're just in that place. We're in that mode. We're in that cycle where change is imminent and always on the horizon. And the best thing that we can do is learn how to surf the chaos and rewire our lives creatively, imaginatively, and taking time out every now and then to just drop out of the virtual world. Go outside, take your shoes off, go down to your local lake or swimming pool or whatever it is. Get out in nature. Get into water. Enjoy life away from the virtual matrix theater. All right, I'm Robert Phoenix. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay open to what's possible. You've been listening to the Friday FARcast. We'll see you on Sunday night.